You know, right now, as you're just sitting there listening to this, there's a silent, invisible war being waged inside your body. Literally, trillions of defenders are fighting off countless invaders, all to keep you alive and healthy. So today, we're going to go behind the front lines and meet this incredible defense force, your immune system.
I mean, just think about it for a second. We are constantly surrounded by bacteria, viruses, all sorts of things trying to get in. So how on earth do we survive this relentless assault? Well, the answer lies in one of the most complex and, honestly, most fascinating systems in all of biology. Okay, let's dive in.
Your body's defense strategy is actually brilliant. It's a two-pronged attack. So on one hand, you've got the innate system. This is your rapid response team. It's super fast, it's general, and it basically attacks anything it doesn't recognize as self. And then, on the other hand, you have the adaptive system. Now, these are your specialists. They're a little slower to act, but they are incredibly specific, and this is crucial, they remember the enemy.
All right, so first up, let's meet those first responders. The innate system is on guard 24/7, always ready to engage any threat at a moment's notice.
You know, your very first line of defense isn't even a cell. It's basically a wall. Your skin and mucous membranes form this incredible physical barrier that most germs just can't get through. But if they do manage to sneak past, they're immediately met with chemical weapons like stomach acid and a whole swarm of these general-purpose attack cells.
So how do these first responders actually fight? Well, their main tactic is something called phagocytosis, and the name says it all. It literally means cell eating. These immune cells, the phagocytes, act like microscopic Pac-Man. They just hunt down invaders, completely engulf them, and then digest them. It's pretty brutal, but wow, is it effective.
So who are these foot soldiers exactly? Well, first you have macrophages. These are the big eaters that are always patrolling our tissues. When they find an enemy, they don't just eat it. They release these chemical signals called cytokines. You can think of them like alarm flares, calling for backup. That backup includes the neutrophils, which are the most common white blood cells, and they just swarm to an infection site. And then you have the natural killer cells. These guys have a really important job, finding and destroying our own cells that have gone rogue, like if they've been infected by a virus.
But what happens when the first responders are just overwhelmed? The infection is too big, or maybe it's too stealthy. Well, that's when the innate system sounds a much bigger alarm and calls in the special forces, the adaptive immune system.
And this, right here, is where things get truly incredible. Because the adaptive system learns. It identifies a specific enemy, builds a weapon custom-made just for it, and then, this is the real game changer, it remembers. This is exactly why you usually only get something like chickenpox once. Your adaptive system has a lifelong memory of that virus. And you know, this principle of creating memory, that's the whole magic behind how vaccines work. Training your body to fight off a disease before you ever get sick.
The elite soldiers of this special ops team are your B cells and T cells. B cells grow up in your bone marrow, while T cells mature in an organ called the thymus. Now, the amazing part is that your body creates millions and millions of different versions of these cells, and each one is programmed to recognize just one specific enemy signature, which we call an antigen. Think of an antigen as the invader's unique uniform or its flag.
Okay, so this diagram might look a little complicated, but the big idea is actually pretty simple. A B cell starts out as a naive recruit, just floating around, waiting for its one specific enemy to show up. When it finally finds a match, boom, it gets activated. Then the key part is down here. It copies itself and changes into two new types of cells. Plasma cells, which become these little antibody factories, and memory B cells, which will patrol your body for years, sometimes decades, giving you that long-term immunity.
So, our special ops cells are trained and activated. But what weapons do they actually use to win the fight? Let's take a look at their arsenal.
So, let's look at how this all plays out. For B cells, the weapon of choice is the antibody. So when a B cell's receptor locks onto its matching invader, it gets the signal to activate and morph into one of those plasma cells. And that plasma cell is a biological factory on a mission, pumping out thousands of antibodies per second that just swarm the invader.
So what do these antibodies actually do? Well, they don't usually kill the invader directly. Instead, a great way to think of them is as highly specific smart tags. They just latch onto the pathogen, flagging it, basically painting a giant target on it that makes it irresistible to those cell-eating phagocytes we met earlier.
And what about the T cells? Well, they come in two main flavors, and they have two very critical but very different jobs. The T helper cells are the field commanders. They don't do the fighting themselves, but they coordinate the entire attack, activating B cells and other fighters. Then you have the cytotoxic T cells. These are the assassins. Their job is to hunt down and kill your body's own cells that have been compromised by a virus, basically stopping the infection from the inside out.
This whole system is so powerful, so precise. It's absolutely essential for our survival. But, when you have an army this powerful living inside you, there's always the risk of friendly fire. There's always a chance the system could make a mistake.
What's really crucial to understand here is that the immune system exists in this super delicate balance. If it overreacts, you get what's called hypersensitivity. Think of things like allergies, where it attacks harmless pollen, or even worse, autoimmune diseases, where it starts attacking your own body. But if it underreacts, that's immunodeficiency, and that leaves you vulnerable to all sorts of infections.
So let's take a look at a classic overreaction. In an allergic response, your system makes a mistake and identifies something totally harmless, like pollen, as a major threat. As you can see here, it creates antibodies that stick to these things called mast cells. So, the next time you're exposed, that pollen binds to the antibodies and it triggers the mast cell to release a flood of chemicals, most famously histamine. And that's what causes all those classic allergy symptoms we all know, the sneezing, the itching, the inflammation.
Now, on the flip side, an underreacting or weakened immune system often shows up as a pattern of infections. We're not necessarily talking about exotic diseases here, but things like sinus or lung infections that just keep coming back, or infections from germs that really don't bother most healthy people, or maybe just an infection that is way more severe than it should be.
So we've met the silent army, its soldiers, its weapons, and we've seen its potential for some really devastating mistakes. It all highlights this incredible balancing act happening inside us every second of every day, between defense and self-destruction. And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating question for the future. As we learn more and more about this system, how can we get better at harnessing its power, not just to fight infection, but to maybe cure a whole new range of diseases?